Hello everybody, it is I, BoneCanoe86, also known as Sudden Plant, and I am here today to tell you a story from my past, a very exciting and interesting story about how I almost became a trucker. The reason I'm telling this story now is because this October is going to be the 5th anniversary of that experience, and since it's coming up pretty close on that, I figured it's time to tell the story. I mean, for a very long time I have been meaning to tell this story because it's quite an interesting story, a lot of detail in it, and but I've never really wanted to do it until I could do it justice. And you can't really, at least I can't really prepare myself for this kind of thing. It just sort of it just sort of comes out of me when I do it, so I have to pick a time to tell it, and the time I have chose is now. And hopefully I will sink, the more I talk, the deeper and deeper into the story I will sink, until I become sort of transported 5 years ago. Because I feel that 5 years is a good time to look back and say, okay, that was something that happened. I don't know, I kind of got bleh. But anyway, it was an event that really brought about a very abrupt change in not only my life, but also my personality, the way I look at the world, even my political views, all really almost turned a 90-degree angle in a very short period of time because of this experience. So what we are going to do to get ourselves into the mindset and into the time period of October of 2008, we are going to paint a picture of 22-year-old Bone. Alright, well, first of all, one thing you need to know is when I was 22, I used to look like this. Bing! Yes, that is actually what I looked like at the time. Hi. How you doing? But yes, you can see I have long hair, big goatee. That's what I looked like at the time, and that pretty much sums it up. I was a very different person. I was no longer in my hippie phase, so to speak. That was more of a 17, 18, 19-year-old thing. But the remnants of that were still held over. I was still pretty liberal, much more than I am these days. I was pretty far left, although not to the extremes I had been during my hippie phase. And I saw having long hair and goatee as part of my identity at the time. And I couldn't bear to even think about, shaving it, cutting it off, and all that stuff. And I lived in this very house, in this very basement at the time, over there, that way. In fact, where my computer was set up until about a week or two ago, was pretty much where it was my old computer was set up at the time. So this was before BoneCanoe86, before any YouTube stuff. It was before I really did too much on the internet other than watch random YouTube videos. I hadn't even discovered what Let's Play was at that time, as most people hadn't. It was only a beginning genre, but that has nothing to do with the story. This time of year, at the end of July, I moved to a town called Williamsport, Pennsylvania, which, if you look at a map of Pennsylvania, is like this. Pennsylvania is in the middle, but it's like north. So it's north central Pennsylvania, very mountainous Appalachian region, very different from the Philly area, because when I was 22, I had a big case of believing the grass was greener on the other side. And I thought that, you know, the whole thing about me loving Philly and me being Philly, all Philly pride, you know, that had not yet been born inside me. When I looked around me at the Philly area, I saw, you know, suburban sprawl. I saw fake people. I saw overpriced real estate and just really, you know, just sort of fakeness everywhere. You know, it just seemed to me that it was just a bunch of bullshit. And to me, the real people, the real, true people who were closer to earth and understood life better, were the ones who lived out in the country and, you know, worked manual labor jobs. And, you know, in that way, I was still holding over from the hippie era of my life. It was kind of a silly notion, looking back on it now. But I had this notion starting from at least the age of 18, and it was still alive in me when I was 22. You know, I always felt that wherever I was, there was something better somewhere else, and I wanted to get away. And I had such a bug to get away from my parents that I kept trying to think of different ways to move out. And at the time, I was working at a Target. I worked in the back room, and it was not a bad job. You know, it wasn't a high-paying job or anything. In fact, I was making even less than I do now at my current job. But it wasn't bad, but I kind of felt like my life was stuck. And I, you know, wanting to move out, I discovered that there was a Target opening, a new Target, that was opening nearby the town of Williamsport, near what is called the Lycoming Mall. Across from this mall was a new shopping center, and in it was a Target. So I said, this is a chance for me to start fresh somewhere new, you know? I just wanted to start a new life. And so I put in for a transfer earlier that year, and I waited for several months. And then in July, this very month, 5 years ago, my transfer request was accepted. So I got an apartment in Williamsport for a rate that you would never dream of getting an apartment here in the Philly area. It was only $375 a month. In the Philly area, you have to pay at least $700-800. So the apartment was small, but you know, I didn't require much. And also, I was only about a 45-minute drive away from where my friend Brian, the paratrooper, lived at the time in Sunbury. Now, I know the paratrooper and I are no longer friends, but he is very central to this story. So we're not going to get into any of the any of the stuff later on. We're focused on 2008. So for the purposes of this story, he's my friend and he's Brian. So we're just, he's part of the story. We can't leave him out. So we were happy to hear that because we'd be closer to each other rather than 3 hours away as we were at the time. And I was pretty excited to be moving out of my parents' house, to be getting out of there. And so in August I moved over, and well, it was pretty good for a bit. But the thing was, I never intended to move to Williamsport to work at Target my entire life. I wanted to do something, different. I wanted to get something going for myself. And this is where the trucking idea enters. the main centerpiece of our story. Now, I had never been like a car guy or a truck guy or anything. I don't really know what's going on under the hood. It's never really interested me that much. But I've always loved driving and just transportation in general. I love driving in cars. I love riding in trains. I like being on bicycles, and I like just walking. And I love the idea of driving a truck across the country. Driving a big old truck, sleeping in the cabin, delivering all the stuff where it needs to go, and just living that lifestyle on the road. It had a very attractive appeal to me. It had a very good draw. So what I ended up doing was, the thing was that it had been one of those things that had come in and out of my mind over the years. Like as long back as the age of 18 or 19, I wanted to become a trucker. But then I kind of was like, nah, let's stay in college and get a degree or something. I mean, of course, that never ended up happening, but the idea was just always in the back of my mind. And then around this time, I had discovered it had always been in the back of Brian's mind as well. And we developed this idea that we wanted to be a trucking team because as much money as you can make driving a truck on your own, you can make a lot more money if you have two people driving that truck, and the truck is basically always moving. Because think about this: when you're driving and your partner's sleeping in the back in the bunk, you're making money. When your partner's driving and you're sleeping in the bunk, you're still making money. The truck is always moving, and it was going to be a great idea. It was just like this great idea. We were like, oh man, we are going to go drive trucks around the country. It is going to be awesome. We were so enraptured by this idea. We went out and we rented classic trucking movies like Convoy and Smokey and the Bandit, and we were like, oh man, we were really excited. At the same time, my Target job was sort of self-destructing, just because, whereas my old Target in Oxford Valley in Bucks County worked like a well-oiled machine, well, as much of a well-oiled machine as a retail place can work. The place up in Williamsport was just new. The managers were coming in from all places. The employees were coming in from all different places, and the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, and it was just chaos. It was not a very good experience up in that Target. And after the first 2 weeks, they seemed to not think that I needed to work that many hours. They would give me 1 or 2 days per week, because they had two problems. They hired way too many people, and the amount of business that they got after the first couple weeks was way lower than they expected. I'm not even sure if that Target's still open. I haven't looked it up in a while, but needless to say, even if I wasn't going to become a trucker, I would have desired to leave that Target anyway. As for Brian, he worked for the county of Northumberland, which is in central Pennsylvania, in the coal region, as a sort of a mapper or a deeds guy. He worked with the deeds and things like that. Like if somebody, sold a property or transferred a property, he would register it in the little archive or whatever. Something along those lines. Not a terribly well-paying job either, but it was unionized. He had benefits, and it was a 9-to-5 office job that was within walking distance of his apartment. So it was some measure of a good thing. But, he had a lot of, he had been there since the beginning of 2007, so that was about a year and a half at that point. And while he had a good first year there, it slowly started coming downhill. There were problems with people in the office. they hired another person who was sort of on his territory trying to take his work, and he sort of felt that he was being made redundant. So, there were plenty of things that were going wrong there, but for him to leave that job was a much more serious thing than me leaving my target, because my job was self-destructing in front of me, and his job was pretty much, he was still getting the same hours, same days, same pay, but he set his heart out on this, and his parents were vehemently opposed to this, like very angry and frightened. My parents were, I wouldn't say they were really vocal about it, but I could tell that they did not want, they weren't too enthusiastic about it. So what ended up happening was we both put in our 2 weeks notice at our jobs, and I remember attending the party for the end of Brian's job at the office, and all that. We even took a little mini road trip up to upstate New York for absolutely no reason at all, just because we were excited and anxious for this to begin. We bought like a briefcase that we could put in the truck. We bought cowboy hats we could wear, even stupid stuff like that. It was a lot of fun. But already I was starting having doubts, because I remember we were in Brian's car and we were on some road somewhere, and he was too nervous to make a left turn from a parking lot onto a road in an area that I thought there was no cause to be nervous about whatsoever. There wasn't that much traffic. It was a 5-lane road, but there wasn't that much traffic, but he would just refuse to turn left. He turned right and then turned around somewhere. And it occurred to me, it's like, you're going to have to be doing stuff like this in a much bigger vehicle, Are you sure that you're going to be able to do this? And he's like, oh, yeah, I'm sure. I'll be able to do that. And I'm like, right, I don't know. But I was willing to put that doubt aside. I'm like, well, there's training in this program. It's going to be fine. So I put those doubts aside. So what we did, a little bit before this, we had, in fact, been accepted into a trucking company. I'm going to try not to say the name, although it might slip out at some point. But it doesn't really matter, even if I do say the name, because what they do is not unique. It's pretty much what all these trucking companies do. But it's a national trucking company, and it's pretty widely known. It's not the biggest one. It's not Swift, but it's one like Swift, we'll say. And in September, we both applied and were accepted to this driving school, which was like a work-to-hire thing. And it was a 3-week-ish accelerated course that would put you in the truck, train you up, and get you on the road. And we're like, all right. So this nationwide big company had 4 different locations, 4 facilities for training, the nearest of which was in Indiana, specifically in the part of Indiana that's a Chicago suburb, the northwestern corner of Indiana, which isn't like that close to Pennsylvania. It's a bit of a trip. So they sent us our Greyhound bus tickets. We would be leaving on Saturday about noontime and getting there Sunday about noontime. It'd be pretty much a 24-hour trip. So, a week before that, we had said our, 2-week notices to our companies. We had gotten everything ready, and we were off. They sent us Greyhound bus tickets, and we're going to take the Greyhound bus to Indiana. So on the day that, that day, I could even look up the exact date because I'm like a dork. Hold on, let's see the calendar here. Click, 2008, October. It was the 11th. The 11th of October. Saturday, the 11th of October, 2008. I left my Williamsport apartment after eating a hoagie from the local hoagie place on the same block where I lived. I had 3 pieces of luggage. I had a big rolling suitcase with like all sorts of clothes and crap in it. I had a small bag that I had my laptop, which is over there even still, because I pretty much just got my laptop at that point a few months previously, and I had a big laundry bag that had like a pillow and a blanket in it because we're like, well, you're going to be right on the truck after this, so you might as well bring like bedding for the truck or whatever. So I had 3 pieces of luggage. You can just picture me. Rolling suitcase behind me, bag slung over my neck, and another bag slung the other way over my neck. And I walked down from my apartment to the bus station. Williamsport is a big small town or a small city. It's either the smallest city in Pennsylvania or it's the biggest town. It's one or the other. It has about 30,000 people. But I walked about like the 10-block distance down to the bus station, waited in anticipation, and the first leg of the trip would take me to Harrisburg. And got on the bus, and just as I predicted, because I had exchanged, what times I was getting on with Brian, it picked him up on the way down to Harrisburg because the bus passed through Sunbury. So he got on the bus, and we were really excited. I mean, this was the first bold thing that either of us had done, We had never really done anything so defiant in our lives. I mean, me dropping out of college, I guess, was a bit defiant. But this was like a positive, definite action, whereas dropping out of college, I would say, was more of just like resigning myself to the facts that on the ground that were already in place. But to Brian, a person who had always just sort of followed along in what his mother and his grandmother and his grandfather had told him to do, this was like a big departure for him. So we were on the bus, very excited. Bus trundled on to Harrisburg. In Harrisburg, we got on a bus that would take us to Pittsburgh. We had our prescription sunglasses all ready because we'd be driving a lot and the sun would be in our eyes, so we had our prescription sunglasses. We got to Pittsburgh, and that was when our first layover was. That was more than just a few minutes. I think it was already night when we got to Pittsburgh, and we both had our our trucking manuals, and we were reading them, and we were hailed by this couple in the bus station who, it turns out, were also going to the same place we were, and they saw that we were reading the trucking manual, so we talked to them, and it was this couple from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which is near Allentown. And they were an interesting people. It was a mixed race couple. It was like a black man and a white woman, and the black guy was actually a preacher, and I guess he was going to be a preaching trucker, or a trucking preacher or something. And his wife, they were going to be a team together, like Brian and I. They're going to be a husband-wife trucking team. So we talked to them for a bit, and waited and waited for the bus for the next leg of the journey, which was to Cleveland, almost thought that we weren't going to get on the bus because there were just so many people ahead of us in the line, and we're like, wow, are we really going to have to miss this bus and go on the next one, which might not come around for 3 or 4 hours? But thankfully enough, we were able to get on that bus, and we trundled on towards Cleveland. By the time we got to Cleveland, it was like 3 a.m. or something ridiculous like that. And the next leg of our journey would take us directly there, because the bus that was departing from Cleveland, its eventual destination was Chicago. And we wouldn't be going all the way to Chicago. We'd be going just most of the way, the majority of the distance to Chicago. So we got on this bus, and I remember having to sit next to this tremendously huge fat guy because there was no other seat. It was kind of uncomfortable, but I made the best of it. During this leg of the journey, which was the longest, I slept a little bit. Don't know how much I slept, don't really remember, but it got a little nap. And the sun was coming up and everything. So then we arrived in Indiana. And I can already tell you it was kind of weird because this was the first time I had been in the Midwest, further than Cleveland, that is, since 2002. And keep in mind, I was born in the Chicago area and lived there for 10 years of my life. So being so close to where I used to live, like I used to live in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, and now I was in Indiana, the Indiana suburbs of Chicago. It was so weird to be like so close, yet so distant in terms of like what was happening and the kind of people I was around and the kind of stuff, like everything. It was just so weird. And we never actually crossed into Illinois during this entire time. We remained within Indiana during the entire course of this story. So, we were off at the the bus station, and there were a bunch of other people there who were going to the trucking thing, and then they sent vans to come pick us up and bring us to the trucking school, which also served, it was a multi-purpose building. It was also like an office, and there was like a shop where people's trucks could get worked on, and, it was at school, also a driving course. All this was in this Indiana facility. So we were all there. It was all very chaotic. No one was quite sure what was like the next step, what was the next thing that was going to happen. Already we met some very interesting people over there, who were out. There was this one guy, Hispanic, who was a truck driver, because also, like, not only were there trainees there, but there were also actual truckers who were in town for various reasons, either dealing with the office or getting their truck work done or whatever the case might be. And this guy was telling me, like, oh man, there's things I have seen out there that I can't explain. Like, I've seen like these weird lights in the desert, and he was like telling all these stories, and it was like really cool. It was very kind of funny. I mean, not funny, it was awesome, to us at the time. It was like really exciting. Like, we felt like this is where we belong. This is where we need to be, And we were at the office, and the processing took place, and I forget exactly how the processing went because, like I said, it's been a very long time. But I remember there was, we had a very, very brief, physical, taking a blood pressure and stuff by this doctor who must have been the biggest dick I ever met. Just he was the rudest, most callous person. But like the thing was, we only had to see him for like 30 seconds each, so it wasn't really a big deal. But he was so rude that 30 seconds like is memorable because of that fact. And there was a whole list of things that you had to have sort of correct in order to be accepted into this program. Like your blood pressure couldn't be above a certain level. So there were a lot of people that took the bus all the way there just to find out their blood pressure was too high to be accepted, and they were sent all the way back home. Now, since people's blood pressure might have been elevated by the journey, they allowed people to take blood pressure the next day if it was too high the first day. But of course, me being Mr. Thin Man, you know, do I still have this picture? Yeah, me being Mr. Thin Man, I of course passed the blood pressure test easily. And Brian did too, although he just barely squeaked by. You know, he's a big guy. But then we were sent over to the hotel. The thing that was slightly inconvenient about this whole setup was, I guess at some point the trucking school had moved locations, because the hotel we were staying at was like a 30-40 minute drive to the west on Interstate 90, I think it was, or it could have been 80. I don't really remember at this point. Right near the Illinois border is where we were staying, whereas the trucking school was a little bit further east. So they put us on school buses and sent us over. And I got very acquainted with these school buses over the next 3 weeks, as I will say. I'm only on the first day, by the way. This is, like I said, this is going to be a long story. But yeah, we got to the facility, or to the hotel, and the company owned a hotel. It was like a little complex with 3 hotels and a strip club. Now, this trucking school, I believe, is and was owned by Mormons. So they pretty much warned us very direly, like, if we catch any of you in that strip club, we're sending you home, you know? So this poor little strip club is next to this trucker thing, and you think it'd be the perfect clientele, but no one's allowed to go over there. So it's pretty funny. But yeah, there were the three hotels. One was owned by the trucking company, and the other 3 were, the other 2 were still filled with the overflow that wouldn't fit in the first hotel because there were just too many truckers. And it was kind of weird because it's like, by their nature, truckers are like solitary people. They live in their trucks and everything, and they're off on their own. And to see so many truckers in one place was like, it's kind of as unnatural as like a herd of cats or something like that. But don't get me wrong, truckers are still sociable people. They have their CB radios and their trucker lounges and stuff. But, you know, their main mode of life is solitary, I guess is what I'm saying. It was just like so strange to see this like big concentration of truckers. So we got to the hotel, and we were put up in one of the other hotels on that block. And the thing was, like, the way it was set up was the hotel was like it was like there was this highway exit, and it came all the way down, and you had to get on the service road and go all the way back up. So we were actually, despite being in the middle of a very dense suburban area, we were like a mile from any kind of anything. So it was a very weird setup. But anyway, Brian and I were like, oh, we're here as a team. Put us up together in a room somewhere. So they put us up in a, like I said, one of the other two hotels in a room. And we were all just like very happy and hanging out with people. Now, I'll talk about the people a little bit. We had the people who came there, by and large, were as much as they did come from all different backgrounds. If I had to say what the average person there was, he was 50 years old. He was fat. He smoked a lot, and he was conservative. That's like the average person who was here at this time. I mean, most of these people had either been truckers before, or they were, some sort of manual labor or factory worker, something like that, and now they wanted to drive a truck. Although there were plenty of exceptions to this. There were, for instance, a number of black people there. There's a lot of black truck drivers. There were a number of women, too. A lot of them, yes, were very butch lesbians, and they were pretty fun to talk to. There was one, a black lesbian who was like 22, who was just like, she wasn't very big, but she was like really cool, like not somebody you want to mess with. She was just very assertive and a very go-getter kind of person. It was very kind of cool to see. And there were other young people too, people in their 20s and 30s. I was among the youngest there. There were possibly a couple other people I met the entire time that were around my age. So it was not bad. One of the guys I befriended pretty immediately. I forget his name. Names. People who know me know I'm not good with names, but we'll call him Paul. I think that was his name, Paul. He was a 32, 33-year-old guy who lived in Wisconsin and had a wife and 2 young kids back home. And Brian and I befriended this guy pretty quick. He seemed like a pretty cool guy. Tall. He was very tall, friendly, and didn't really look or act that much older than us, even though he was about 10 years older than me. So that was the guy we befriended. And there was this other guy this Hispanic guy called Ricky, I think was his name was. But at some point, one of the instructors gave him the name of Rocco. Like, you are Rocco. And so he was Rocco from that point on. And, oh man. These are people I haven't thought about in years and years. And yeah, like I said, there was that 45-year-old butch lesbian trucker chick, and there was a girl who was mid-20s, a little chubby, little kind of kooky, but she apparently had worked at a Subway for all these years, making hoagies, and decided that she wanted to become a trucker. And she was there too. She was very, I don't know. She was very, what's what I'm looking for? Well, she seemed to, in the very brief time I knew her, she seemed to be interested in like 3 or 4 different of the guys there, and was like, oh, I'm going to be in a trucking team with this guy. He's told me all about his place in this area. We're going to go live there and everything. And then a few days later, she's like, oh, this guy over here, he's so cool. He was talking about, it was all like that, She was that kind of person. But, and she was good, and she became good friends with the butch trucker lesbian person. And there was, like, another guy who just seemed like he was like a druggie or something. but he seemed like, well, I shouldn't say he seemed like a druggie. He seemed like one of those guys who like was like an ex-druggie, and he's like, oh, I'm here to work and do, I'm here to get this. I really need this, like he's trying to fight his way back from that. I already told you about the husband and wife team that was there. Let's see, who else was there? There was this other guy who was in his 40s, who was just a very interesting kind of person. It's hard to describe this guy, but he was just one of those guys who had been around a lot and seen a lot of things. It's kind of weird because he was a preacher and a very religious person, but at one point he was like a big drinker and everything and a big partier, and he had he was like one of those guys who just like spoke the truth about everything. He was a good guy, and he had like a bunch of false teeth like at the top here, and he used this thing where he'd like push him back and forth with his tongue. It was kind of disconcerting at first until you got to know him. Forget his name, sadly. And let's see, there are so many other people there. There was a 45-year-old black guy, like gigantic, who was there, and he got the nickname Icebox after a while. It was kind of funny. So this is just a digression. Some of the people I met during that time. So basically, we all got settled into the first night, and we learned that the days would be very, very long. Basically, the school bus that would take us from the hotel to the place would be arriving at like 5:15 in the morning, something like that. Like the day began at 6 in the morning and ended at 5 in the evening. Every day, and when I say began and end, that was from the time we got there to the time we left there was our days. So 11-hour days with, half an hour or an hour for lunch. And so basically I had to get up at 4:30 in the morning to be ready to get on the bus at 5:15 in the morning to start the class at 6. And there were no weekends, there were no half days. That was my life for 2 weeks. It was almost like being in boot camp. So basically, the first thing that we did at the trucking school was we had to pass in order to get a CDL in Indiana, you first have to have a driver's license in Indiana, and to do that, you have to take the written test in Indiana. So we all pretended we were 16-year-olds and studied our driver's manuals to take the Indiana test. And, the regular driving test. Not even truck, like car. And our instructor was this, pretty chill guy. He was in maybe 50 or so. Always had a lot of chewing tobacco. A lot of people there liked their chew, A lot of people smoked, a lot of people chewed, And was definitely one of the odd ones out because I neither smoked nor chewed. I hadn't discovered my love of Black and Milds yet. That would actually come very shortly after this whole thing, and not in small measure because of it too, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. So we went through this. I had my notebook out, was taking notes, and Brian was there, and things were going pretty well. We passed. We worked on the driver's test, and then we also worked on the CDL test. And the CDL test had multiple components of it because you needed to pass a test for the to get the CDL, and then you needed to pass one for a combination vehicle, and then I think there was a completely different test for something else, some other component of the truck. Like, we weren't worried about tankers, and we weren't worried about hazmat at that moment, but we were just worried about those things. And so basically, Monday and Tuesday were spent doing that. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I think. And then on Thursday, we were all split up into groups and brought to different driver's license centers in that part of Indiana to take our 4 tests because it's the driver's test, CDL test, and those 2 other tests. And the way the Indiana law works, like many states, is if you don't pass, you can take it again the next day, but you can't take it again the same day. So we had it was kind of weird because I got an Indiana driver's license, which listed my address as the corporate building, the training grounds. So I held an Indiana license for a very short time, and of course, I had a picture kind of like that on my Indiana license, and then got the CDL permit, and I passed everything on the first day. And I got a call from Brian, who was in a different group at a different center, and he passed everything on the first day too. Basically, you had to pass everything before you could even get into a truck. Actually, I can confirm the exact date of that because, I remember. It was Wednesday. Monday and Tuesday, we spent the entire day in the classrooms, and then Wednesday was the day we took that test. So basically, everyone had 4 chances to do it. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Because they couldn't do it on Sunday. I guess it was either closed or it was too late in the curriculum. But you wanted to pass it on Wednesday because the first test from the trucking place was that coming Sunday. So basically, if you pass the test, you could get it on Wednesday, you could get into the truck on Thursday and practice Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and on Sunday you pass your first test. But if you failed the first day, you'd have to wait till the next day to try, and you'd get less and less time, to the point where if you passed on Saturday, you'd have to get in the truck for your first time on your test and hope for a miracle. This is how things work at this trucking school. But thankfully, that wasn't a problem because I passed my test on the first try. And so did Brian. We passed all 4 of our tests. So, and I distinctly remember that day, October 15th, 2008, was the high point. That was the day that we felt the best. That was the apex of our experience there. We had passed our permit test and all that other stuff, and we were about to go in the actual trucks for the first time the next day. We couldn't feel better. We were in a great mood. We ordered out a pizza, and one of the presidential debates happened to be on between Obama and McCain, because it's 2008, and we watched that debate while eating our pizza in a very good mood. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the apex. Everything was great. But then Now we get into when things started to go down. And boy, would they go down, and down, and down, and down. So, what happened was, Thursday morning, going to the place, getting in the trucks for the first time, and it was going to be exciting. We couldn't wait. And they divided us up into groups. There were 9 of us in this group, and they gave us all numbers or something. And there's 9 of us, and I was number 5. Brian was number 6. Now, this is where our friend Paul sort of started to go from cool bro mode to like a kind of a dick mode, because like he had a very much like, oh, it's every man for himself here. So I'm going to suck up to our instructor as much as possible so I get the most time in the truck so I can get, succeed. Which I guess was probably the best way to go about it, because you would think in an 11-hour day you would have like many goes in the truck. Well, sorry to say, but that's not really the case. If you were lucky, you got to be in the truck 2, maybe 3 times during an 11-hour day. If you were unlucky, you got to be in the truck once or not at all. It all depended on any number of factors that were beyond any of our control. And keep in mind, we did sort of there was almost like a survivor type thing going on where people would be called into the office to address some sort of irregularity about their paperwork that they submitted or something like that. And very often, when a person would be called to the office to go over something about their paperwork, they would come back, or they would not come back at all, and we would hear later that they had been sent home. So, we lived in fear of the ominous summoning to the office to go over our paperwork. I was summoned to the office 3 times over the course of that time I was there, and every one of those 3 times I walked there like, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God. But all 3 of the times it was something very minor, and it was nothing. So I was like, oh, almost getting a heart attack every time I summoned. Other people, not so lucky. Not so lucky. If there was something irregular about what they had printed about their driving record, or if things didn't match up, I'm sorry. You were sent home. And some people, like, if they didn't discover they had certain medical conditions, I'm sorry, we can't have you. We'll send you home. Because I learned something when I was there that I didn't know before I got there. Apparently, about 30 people every week go to this trucking school. From what I heard, only about 3 people out of every group of 30 end up as employees of this company a few months down the road. So I was like, holy crap. I quit my job. Brian quit his job. We came down here. We pretty much gave up everything to do this. And we have a 10% chance of actually succeeding. Now, this wasn't all stuff that dawned on me on that Thursday when things started to go downhill. This is all stuff that would come out later on. But it's all very relevant. But all that is not the main thing that happened. I mean, when we got onto the truck the first time, we were told to just drive it forward and drive it back, back up a little bit. In fact, I'm not even sure we were backing up at that point. I think we were just driving the truck forward slightly. And, number one, our guy Paul, our survivor champion, he was first on the truck, and he drove it without minimal problems. We had number 2, 3, and 4 going on the truck, and they did like varying degrees of better and worse. Like, there were a lot of moments where someone would stall the truck, and but nothing was really too terrible. And then it was my turn, number 5, and I got up in the truck, sitting in the cabin, and the first thing that you notice is something that's pretty obvious, but you don't really understand it until you're actually there. That truck is fucking big. Like, you look in the cabin and it's like, oh my god, I could park a car in this cabin. Like, you're like 12 feet up or something. Well, not really 12 feet, but like you're at least 10 feet up or 8, or you're high up. When you're in a car, low down to the ground. When you're in a pickup truck, you're up, but in the truck, you're up, you're high. And like, you're perched on the seat, and there's a steering wheel, and there's this gear shift, and there's all these buttons and all these displays and everything. It's like you're flying an airplane. It's like, holy shit. Looking at it, and it's like, oh my god, And like, things don't work as you're used to because, for one thing, there's air brakes, and there's like an air pressure gauge, and the parking brakes are also air brakes. And there's different brakes for your truck and for the trailer, and there's also the Jake brake. And there's a gear shift which has 8 gears. And since it has an up and a down, it's really 16. So it's like, and did I mention it's big? It's really big. And this isn't even, I'm not even talking about the trailer. Like, the truck itself, the tractor, is big. And when you add in the trailer, you have something that's just gigantic. And you sit up there and you're like, holy shit. It's like, all right, release the parking brake, hold down the clutch, release the parking brake, roll forward. And it was almost like I was a 16-year-old kid driving a car for the first time. It's like, And like, I put down the brake, and I stalled the truck like 3 or 4 times. And the guy's like, it's not an automatic. You have to put your foot on the clutch. Now, I didn't tell you about our instructor, Like I said, we were divided into groups, and we each had our own instructor for each group. This guy was, a grizzly guy, like wild hair, in his 50s probably. And he was not a mean person, but he was a little rough around the edges. Like, he wasn't the kind of person to hold your hand and whisper reassuring things into your ear. He was the kind of guy who would very... 1 minute. Be right Alright, I'm back. Anyway, so, my instructor, yeah. He would bark orders, and he had this particular way of commanding that was very striking. It was like, turn the wheel to the left. And he spoke in like this gruff voice with that exact intonation. Turn the wheel to the left. Turn the wheel to the right. And so on like that. Something that was, if you're a person who was easily intimidated, you would be intimidated by that. Which is kind of a redundant thing to say, but I was maybe slightly intimidated. But poor Brian. We're going to get to him in a moment. But yeah, I was driving the truck, and when I got done, he's like, we're going to have to do some work with you. And I was like nervous because it's like, oh, okay. You know, like I was definitely like the worst person who had gone so far. But then Brian went in the truck, and he completely dissolved. Like, he completely collapsed. He couldn't do anything, and the truck, like, he barely got the truck to do anything, and it was stalling over and over, and the guy was like yelling his commands, which would make Brian more and more flustered. And I was just standing there watching, and I'm like, holy shit. And and he got down off the truck, and he had the most, you know, when he went in the truck, he was all smiles, like, wish me luck, here I go, you know. And when he got out of the truck, he had like 1,000-yard stare, and he was like, holy shit. Like, he was like, I think he said something like, I was horrible, like, he was like shaken, like I think something snapped at that moment in the deepest depths of his mind, you know. From that moment on, his life would never be the same. I believe that he failed that moment. Even though he was still there at the test, or at the testing grounds for a while longer, I feel that moment he realized, like, I can't do this. Or he had that notion in his mind. And from that point on, he was by far, the worst person at that trucking facility. He became a joke to everyone else. He was like a laughingstock. And I even found myself distancing myself from him. Even though we came in together, we came in with the notion that we were going to be a team, and we were like best bros. That distance started to form. Now, that very same night, we were being moved back into the main hotel because enough people, I guess, had left or had been shifted elsewhere. But we couldn't be in the same room as each other. And so we just had to accept that. And he was placed in a room with like an older man, at least in his 60s, who apparently had diabetes and was eventually sent home because he had diabetes. And he was thinking he might sue because of that fact. But this is... But I don't really know too much about what happened over there. But here comes the tale of my 3 roommates. Now keep in mind, there wasn't too much time to hang out in the room because, like I said, the day began at 4:30 in the morning, waking up, taking a shower or not, you know. We're freaking truckers, you know. There were times where I went almost a week without a shower, which is something I used to do back then, don't really do anymore because that's kind of Gross. Kind of grody. But day begins at 4:30. Get on the truck at like 5 in the bus. You get down there at 6. You go all day until 5. You go home, and go home to the hotel, and by that time it's 6 o'clock in the evening. And what little time you have, you are either at the very beginning we were studying our driver's manuals, but after that, you have time to unwind. I mean, of course you're going to be hungry and you're going to want to eat, but like I said, this place we were in was not near anything despite being in the middle of a dense suburb, but they were kind enough to have shuttle vans that would bring us to the nearest shopping center, which was nice, except these vans weren't always there when you wanted them, and so you found yourself walking a lot. Yeah, after a day that began at 4:30 and a 12-hour day of intense trucking and being shouted at by these drill sergeant types, and you would find yourself walking a mile or two to the Kmart, and it wasn't even like a big Kmart. It was like a very meager Kmart, and there was like a refrigerator section, and right next to it was a dollar store. So between those two places, I had to subsist on what I could find at the Kmart and the dollar store. And at the trucking place, they had a cafeteria, but the people that they contracted to do the food there, it was about the equivalent of the worst school lunch. You ever see those really bad school lunches that have this unidentified meat, and then they have this brown rice that doesn't taste like anything but like cardboard? It was like that. It was that kind of food. And they charged you $5 for it every day. And you ate that. You ate you had a juice box and a prepackaged muffin in the morning, or you drink your coffee if you were a coffee person, which I wasn't at the time. I totally am now, of course. And then you ate that, and then at night you had to subsist on Kmart and dollar store food. Yes, I was eating a lot of Lunchables. I was eating a lot of chips and salsa. I was eating a lot of dollar TV dinners. Have you ever had a dollar TV dinner? I mean, first of all, you can buy a decent TV dinner for like $3, but even it's prepackaged and kind of weird. Imagine what a dollar TV dinner bought at the dollar store would be. And now imagine that you have to live on that. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's the kind of thing that we had to live on. Oh, man. So we had this, and so what I'd often find myself doing was, walking over, getting my chips and salsa, my Lunchables, my dollar TV dinners, and walking back. And the bus, the vans would come sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes you'd take the van there and have to walk back. Sometimes you'd walk there and find there was a van there ready to take you back. So I did all 4 combinations. Took the van there and back, walked there and back, walked there, van back, and van there, walked back, multiple times during this period of time. I walked with other people, I walked alone, all sorts of things. And these vans were driven mostly by truckers who had their trucks in the shop, and it was something for them to do while they waited, something like that. So wasn't bad, but had 3 roommates and 3 very different people. The first roommate I had was a 65-year-old Turkish guy from Vermont, and he was an interesting guy. He loved to watch CNN. He loved to talk about how much he loved Obama, which seems kind of, he's a 75-year-old or 65-year-old Turkish guy. Don't know what the connection is there, but he used to talk about how much he loved Obama. And he's like, "You love Obama too, don't you? You're a young guy." And I'm like, sure. And he was always telling stories to me about how he used to sell rugs all over the Middle East. Like he was like, "Oh man, I used to sell rugs in Afghanistan back in the '70s and stuff like that." And it was just like these crazy stories he would tell that were really interesting. But like this old guy, he was a total bro. He was a neat guy, and we used to hang out and talk quite a lot. And let's see, the second roommate was a 35-year-old black guy who was originally from Detroit, but apparently had moved to somewhere else in Michigan. And he was a cool guy too. We used to hang out and we'd watch various shows. I remember we watched the movie Cranked in that place. And you know, I got, in that very short time I was there, they had this network Showtime that I never had before. You know, never had a cable package that had Showtime, and they had this show called Californication. I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but like that show drew me in. Like when I would go back to the hotel in the evening, that would be like my show. Like me and the 35-year-old black guy, we would be watching Californication, which doesn't have anything to do with the Chili Peppers, even though it sounds the same, and I think there's a lawsuit over that. But like, I don't even know like why, but that show just like drew me right in. And I never watched it before, never watched it after, but for like those 2-3 weeks, it was like awesome. Oh man. So basically there was all that going on. And then the third and final roommate was a 24-year-old conservative Republican from Evansville, Indiana. Now, he was a bro, too. Like, don't get me wrong. He was a bro, but he would constantly tell me about how Nancy Pelosi was a fascist and the country was going to be going to shit when Obama was elected. So he was like the opposite of like the other guy. It was kind of funny. The guys both got younger and conservative-er as time went on. And it was pretty interesting. Like, I had good memories of all three of my roommates while I was there. Yeah. Where was I in the story? Okay, well, like I said, that Thursday we practiced, and basically there were 3 maneuvers we were practicing. The straight line back, which was basically, if I could pretend a pen is a truck, is where you go forward and you pull back, which seems pretty simple until you realize the trailer will go out in one way or the other, and you're going to have to figure out how to, turn the wheels. It's pretty easy in theory because, like, if you look out your left window and see the trailer sticking out that way, turn your wheel to the left, and it takes care of that. But, like, things line up, like, funky, and you find you're off center, and you find, like, all these little things, and so, blah, blah, blah. The second one was a maneuver, I forget the name of it, but you start in a spot, you go forward, and you sort of do one of these. You sort of go into the next spot and pull back, which sounds very easy until you actually do it. It's not that easy. And the third, and by far the hardest maneuver, was parallel parking. Yes, we had to parallel park using a tractor trailer. Now, if I can demonstrate, which I can't really, when you pull back, it goes like that, and then you have to, like, I can't even demonstrate it, but, like, in a car, you pull up to the spot, head of the spot, look over your shoulder, wheel all the way to the right, wheel all the way to the left, and then you're in. Not with a truck. You have to turn the wheel, like, the other way so the trailer goes the right way, and you have to do, like, 3 or 4 different steps, And let me tell you, you will never, ever, ever think that parallel parking in a car is hard once you have tried it in a truck. Let me tell you. When I drove a car for the first time after this whole experience, it was amazing how easy it was in comparison. Because those trucks, they were just parallel parking that was a nightmare. But we had to do that. And the first test, which was on that Sunday, was, I don't think it was all three of the maneuvers. I think it might have just been the first two or maybe even the first one. And so basically it would be and this was, by Sunday I was getting better. Like, I was no longer stalling the truck. I realized that you had to press down the clutch when you pressed down the brake or else it was going to shut off. I realized these things, and so I was getting worried that Brian was going to fail out that Sunday. Now, keep in mind, we weren't roommates in the hotel anymore, so I often wouldn't see him until until either we got on the bus or sometimes not even until we got there. And after a while, I wouldn't even seek him out. I would just sort of, if he was there, it's like, oh, hi, which is weird because, like, everyone else there I just met, like, there. But I had already known for years, and it was almost to the point where we were becoming strangers. Like, this place was doing things to us. It was weird. But let me talk about those buses for a minute, because this is my favorite part of the story, these buses. Because most of the buses, they're all driven by these, like, middle-aged, elderly black men, and most of them would put on smooth jazz on the bus. Like, let's say you have to get up at 4:30 in the morning and you're on the bus at like 5:15. The last thing you want to hear is smooth jazz. You're like, oh god, turn off the freaking Kenny G, man. But that's what they would play because they were old and they didn't want. But there was one bus driver who was a party animal. He was awesome. He was the man. Like, he would put on Guns N' Roses. He would put on Metallica. He put on, like, all these, like, hard rockin' bands, and he would turn the volume all the way up, both on the way there and on the way home. And he would, like, get on the radio between the songs, like he was like a radio announcer or a DJ or something, and chat with us. It's like, how y'all doing today, and all that kind of stuff. He was a freaking man. He was like the coolest guy who you will ever meet, most likely. Now, keep in mind, we had to get from our hotel to the trucking school, we had to pass through Gary, Indiana, every day, both ways. Most times we take the highway, but sometimes there'd be construction or there'd be traffic. So this guy liked to go through the back streets of Gary, Indiana, to get to our destination. And he wouldn't just drive through those streets. He'd fly through those streets in a school bus full of fat, sweaty truckers down the side streets of Gary, Indiana, going like 60 on these local streets. So you have not lived until you've been in a school bus full of 60 sweaty, hairy truckers with Welcome to the Jungle blasting out of the school bus, being driven 60 miles an hour on the side streets of Gary, Indiana. I mean, it's literally the coolest thing that I've ever seen, most likely. I don't know, but it would definitely be up there. Like, it was really cool. It was really funny. Definitely much preferable to the smooth jazz guys. Oh, man. And so we were at anyway, Sunday we had the test, and lo and behold, the test turned out to be like, if you did well, you passed. Even if you didn't well, they just passed you, and you're like, yeah, you're fine. So to my and everyone else's shock, Brian was not sent home after that test, and he was on to the next phase. The next phase, and keep in mind, like, one thing I didn't mention is, like I said, 11-hour days, maybe 9 or 10 when you take out times for food and various other things spent on the court, the driving facility. You had a lot of time where you weren't driving the truck, obviously. And really the only things you could do was either watch other people drive the truck, or you could practice your what's the word I'm looking for? Your pre-trip inspection, or whatever it was called. It was like a very long checklist of things that you had to check in the truck. And, it was in under the hood and under this and that. And it's like one of the key phrases was properly mounted and secure. It's like, is this properly mounted and secure? It's like this, the doohickey is properly mounted and secure. It's connected. There's no cracks or ridges. This thingy, properly mounted and secure. All the hoses are connected and there's no holes, there's no tears, or, all that stuff. It was a lot to remember and you had to memorize it. However, when you have 7 or 8 hours that you are not in a truck and there's nothing else to do, we all got pretty good at that damned inspection. It was literally all we had to do during those times. But anyway, we are now at Monday. Monday of what day? I feel a need for some reason to keep this in the proper date where everything happened. Monday the 20th. Okay, the 20th. Monday the 20th of October was, okay, you passed the first test, you have your CDL permits, we're going to drive around, the area. So basically, we divided up into groups of, I believe it was 5, and we each had a driving instructor. And the guy I had was this guy who was maybe like 30 or so. This was really chill, laid back kind of guy. And I was in the same team as Rocco and Icebox and a couple other people. And we'd take turns driving. And you'd think now we'd get more of a chance to drive the truck, but somehow, I'm not sure how this all worked out, but I only got to drive that truck, like drive it, maybe 3 or 4 times at most during those few days in which we were in the truck. Like I said, don't know how it happened. But needless to say, Brian was in another group, and I was thankful for that. I think he was in the same group as Paul, that guy. But the very first time I drove that truck, I was I was shifting like all not smoothly, and everyone was like, being thrown back and forth, and they were like, hey, my back hurts and everything, and the thing was like, you gotta treat the truck like a lady, treat her like a lady, you want her to enjoy herself. If you fucked a lady that way, she wouldn't be able to walk for a week, That's what they told me. It was pretty funny. But the second and third, and if there was one, a fourth time, I was good. Like, I could drive that truck like a motherfucker. I took to it very naturally. And I was pretty happy about it. But I remember there was at least one day where our driving day was cut short because we had to bring the truck over to the one of the testing centers because the truck that was there had broken down or something. So we were robbed of like half a day of driving, including my turn, by the way. And we only had so many days to do this because the actual CDL tests were coming up. This is what determined if you could actually drive the truck for the company, because you need a fucking license to do that. They gave you 3 attempts to pass the test, and if you did not pass on your 3rd attempt, you were sent home. You were done. So, no pressure, right? You just got to learn how to do your maneuvers with 3 or 4 times behind the wheel. And you had to learn, and you had to drive the truck through town, with 3 or 4 times behind the truck. No pressure, right? The trucking test was in a town in Indiana called Valparaiso. And apparently part of the test involved driving the truck through the town, and you have to, make turns that are tight. You had to go around a roundabout and all this other stuff. And, we were supposed to drive the course. And a few people got a chance to do it, but I didn't get a chance to do it because they had to bring the truck over to the testing center to blah, 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 blah. So I was basically entering into this with minimal experience. But before we get there, things with I was talking less and less to Brian, seeing him less and less, and then I don't see him Tuesday morning, the 21st of October, and then I learned secondhand that he was sent home the previous day. Or no, I think it was Wednesday that I learned he had been sent home on Tuesday. And my reaction to the guy being sent home, who was the bro that I had come here with, I had forged this pact to become partners with, and we quit our jobs together. We went over here. After 10 days of being in this trucking center, my response to learning that he had been sent home was basically, oh, okay, whatever, I don't care. Because by that point, I had washed my hands of him, and I was like, well, he might suck. He might have no chance, but I have a chance. I'm going to go ahead with this, even if it means leaving him behind. And after the embarrassment of seeing how terrible he had done, and everyone knowing that he had come in with me, I was happy to push him away, distance myself from him. In retrospect, given what happened this year, that might have been a good thing if that stayed permanent, but, that's not the story we're telling tonight. So, I was there, and he was gone, and I knew he was going back to Sunbury to sulk and whatever. But what he did didn't matter anymore because I was going to still pass. Now, the first test was set on Friday. Let me look at that calendar. Let's look at that calendar, bros. Friday the 24th. Now, keep in mind, this was the same October that the Phillies won the World Series. I had no idea this was going on at the time. Like I said, Philly pride wasn't born in me yet. I didn't watch sports, and I was in frickin' Indiana. Who in Indiana cares about the Phillies? This was all going on. I had no idea. I didn't know until days later that it even had happened. But I went and I took this test, and of course, it was an all-day thing. Everything there was an all-day thing. And I did the pre-trip inspection all right, but then I failed on the air brakes test. Just a little minor detail I messed up. The guy even gave me a chance, are you sure that's right? And I'm like, and he's like, no, that's wrong, you fail. So he even gave me that chance. It was sort of like, it was one of those stupid things where I should have paid more attention. And so I failed the test the first time, as did everyone who was there that day. We were in groups of 4, because apparently these tests take a really long time. It was fortunate that I had brought my laptop with me, and I was, apart from maybe 1 or 2 other people, the only one who did bring a laptop. And in my CD drive of the laptop, I had SimCity 4. In fact, it was the very same SimCity 4 disc that I have right now in this tower. And I used to play SimCity while waiting. And it was like the nerdiest thing, because like, here I am with all these truckers, and I'm playing SimCity. And I brought a book with me too. It was an Arthur C. Clarke book, like a collection of short stories. So I was like the nerd. It was kind of cool. But yeah. And it's like, oh, are those cities, do you still have the cities? No, those cities were wiped out in the great hard drive crash of April 1st, 2009. Sorry, that's all gone. But, yeah, you sit there and play SimCity while waiting. And the cities weren't very good anyway. But first day was 0 for 4. 4 of us were there, and we failed. And that was that Friday. So we were nearing the end of the second week. But like I said, there were no weekends in this place. Things never stopped or slowed down for a second. So we had, on Saturday and Sunday, we had a bit of a break from the driving stuff to do, I guess you could call it onboarding with the company. And where they sort of set you up to be an employee of the company or whatever, and all these kind of legal things, and they gave us like at least 10 or so booklets of various things, and it was in a different room than before, and I was there for all that. I remember one of the things was like, oh, the trucker legal team can be on retainer for you because we've overturned 97% of tickets and stuff like that. And they scared us with a video of like how cops will unfairly target truckers, and how they will help us, get out of tickets that could end our careers or sideline us for a while. And we're like, oh shit, let's all sign up for that, all that kind of stuff. And it was pretty good. I had a little bit of a scare on Sunday, though, the 26th, I believe we're up to. So we had a where am I? I got lost. But I had my alarm clock set to wake me up at 4:30. It was one of those fancy alarm clocks that sets itself by honing to some radio signal or something like that. And so basically we were all supposed to wake up at that, get up for the bus. However, first of all, my roommate he was an actual trucker. He wasn't a student, so the alarm didn't ring. It was relevant to him to get up at that time. But my clock was programmed to change for daylight savings time. Daylight savings time ends, or at least used to, at the end of October. However, there was a law passed a year or two before that where they said, you know what, we're going to change daylight savings time to end in the beginning of November instead of the end of October. Well, nobody told my alarm clock that. My alarm clock decided to fall back on Sunday morning, the 26th. So when my alarm clock said, it's 4:30, time to wake up, it was really 5:30. The buses were already gone, And I was like, oh shit, like they'd kick people out over the most minor things. They're gonna kick me the fuck out over this. I know they will. But I'm like, oh wait a minute, it's Sunday. You know what that means? Sunday is a day. Like, I arrived on a Sunday 2 weeks previously, and that was the day that all the candidates and all the people who get in on the program arrive. And I'm like, yeah, there are buses that go to the place in the middle of the day, unlike usual. So about 10:30 or so, there was this group of truckers, or trucker wannabes that were hanging around outside, and I just joined them. I just put myself in there, hey, how you doing? And got myself onto one of those vans. Nobody questioned me about it, and it was all fine. When we got there, they walked one way, I walked the other, and I was in the classroom. Of course, my late entry was noted, but I'm like, I'm sorry. I told them the story. They all thought I was making it up, but it was all good. He was like, this will be reflected in your final grade. He was probably joking. I mean, what final grade? But, so I dodged that bullet. I dodged so many bullets. And so all that happened. Monday, we're now entering the final week. This is a long story. We're entering the final week now. Monday, back on the court, and I was in the truck 4 times, and 4 times I flawlessly parallel parked the fucking truck. And it was beautiful. It was wonderful. And then, I don't know what happened, but on Tuesday, I couldn't do it at all. There were basically, one thing that was happening was there was a lot of truckers who were in for various reasons, and they were told, hey, go help out the students out there. And and they kept giving contradictory advice and everything, and just everything got messed up in my head, and I just couldn't do it right after that. Which became a problem because the next day, Wednesday, was the day of the second test. And I got through the pre-trip inspection. I got through the air brakes exam, which I had failed the first time, but I could not do the parallel parking on the test. So I failed a second time, only one more time to go. At this point, I was feeling pretty disheartened. I'm like, you know what? Given the amount of training they give you, it's no wonder that only 10% of people end up being long-term employees for this company. And it was about this time that I started to learn those facts as well. And I'm like, I'm most likely not going to pass here. And I reflected on that, I remember. And it was a pretty dire thing because, I had given everything to be here and to be doing this. And this was my big hope for my life. And I thought, what would life be like when I failed? And it was literally inconceivable. The possibility had not even occurred to me before I came here that I could fail. I mean, I'm sure a doubt popped in the back of my mind, but I just dismissed it because I'm not going to fail. I'm excellent, I'm going to win. So I was well, and it was just this dark, foreboding feeling this is the end of everything, Life as I know it will never be the same. So Wednesday ended, which was, I believe, the 29th. Let me verify that. Yeah, it was. Wednesday the 29th ended. October 30th began. And this Thursday, we were out in the course again, but at this point I was so disheartened. I spent most of the day down in the classroom with that one girl I had told you about who was woo, out there looking over our manuals, because that's stuff we need to know when we're truckers, and I think we're both a little bit disheartened about our 2 failures. And So that was mostly what happened that day. I was getting pretty disillusioned. I was like, well, unless I can pull a miracle out of my hat on Friday, I am not going to pass. So Friday comes along. It's the final day. And we go to the testing center. And first, I pass pre-trip inspection again. I pass the air brakes, but I still fail on the parallel parking. And the woman who was testing me, I was a woman. I remember she knew it was my last test too, and she just gave me the sad look and shook her head like, nope, sorry. Because she was sympathetic, she knew what that meant, and I was like, well, that's that. So, sat there and waited in the testing room. That girl, she also failed the third time. Failed that. Sat there waiting, thinking like, what's going to happen now? Went back to the trucking depot, talked to some people. Of course, all these various truckers who were giving me different advice was like, oh, you didn't succeed because you didn't follow my advice, because my advice was the right advice, his advice was the wrong advice. It was like that. So I was sitting there, and I was talking to the guy, remember the Christian preacher guy, who had come there on the same bus? He was like, oh man, you gotta ask for one more try, and he gave me this like whole inspirational preacher-esque speech, like, you gotta ask for one more try. And even though I was very disheartened by that point, I went to the boss, who was called Chris. This real short, skinny guy, like you wouldn't expect him to be a trucker, but he was. And I asked him one more time, like one more try, and he's like, I'm sorry. Like, he appreciated my attitude and my enthusiasm. He's like, yeah, I'm sorry, we have a pretty strict policy. We can't give people extra tries, So that was that. I got my bus tickets back to Williamsport, and that same day, that same Friday, the 31st of October, I was to leave Indiana and go back to Williamsport. So, rode the bus back to the hotel for the final time, gathered up my stuff, forgot my awesome alarm clock. That awesome alarm clock that had so wonderfully made me late the one day, and packed up my stuff and got onto that van, brought me to the bus station. And waited at the bus station, got on the bus. And I can tell you the trip back seemed like it was a million years removed from the trip there. It didn't even seem like it was part of the same lifetime. I was, after having these, by that point it was 21 days, almost 3 complete weeks of days that began at 4:30 in the morning. The bus brought me to the trucking depot at 6, went home at 5, ate my Kmart and dollar store food, and passed out 8, 9, 10 for what meager sleep I could get before doing it all again. No breaks, no weekends. And now I'm going home. I sit on the bus, and that bus ride, which was almost another 24-hour bus ride, seemed to pass in like no time. It seemed like I went around the block and I went home. I remember, and of course, since Brian was already home, I I took the bus journey alone. Took the bus to Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and then the bus went from Pittsburgh to a town called Du Bois, Pennsylvania, and took a bus from there, past through State College and, where Penn State is and all that, back to Williamsport. And I got back to Williamsport, and it was like, I'm here again, you know? It's weird. It's very weird to be back here in Williamsport. And I remember taking the loneliest walk in the world from the bus station back to my apartment. I remember rolling suitcase behind me filled with clothes, the thing over my shoulder with my laptop and other items in it, and my thing with my blankets on it over my other shoulder. I walk up to my Williamsport apartment and went inside, and for the final time I put that stuff down, and I'm like, here I am, you know, it's over. And it was very weird because the hoagie wrapper the hoagie I had eaten before I left for the bus, I threw the wrapper on the ground, and that wrapper was still there in the same spot when I got back. And it just sort of like highlighted the whole surreal nature of the situation. It was like, this is weird, you know. It's like how could this lifetime be anything like that lifetime, you know? And in the days and weeks following my return to Williamsport, I found that something had switched in my head too. I had suddenly become a different person. I was no longer this person. I was now somebody else. Everything changed after that. My musical taste even changed. Even though my favorite band, Genesis, still remained, I became much less inclined to the softer, gentler music I had been listening to. I mean, think the band that I had been listening to the most right before I went to Indiana was the Moody Blues. You know? Nights in White Satin. And when I came back, I was digging around for the hardest album I could find, and I realized like the most like up-tempo hard thing I could find was Yes's 90125 or whatever that's called. And I'm like, that's all I've got. So I went, and I knew I had more CDs like in the apartment somewhere, so I dug, and I found Metallica, the Black Album. I put that fucker into the car, into the CD player, and I drove I was going to the mall, and hearing that the first notes of the Enter Sandman was like the most amazing, almost therapeutic thing. It was just like, yeah. And I remember I went to see Brian a couple days after this for like our first meeting post-trucking. I mean, even though I had sort of like dumped him at the time, you know, we were in the same boat now. And when I pulled up to pick him up, he was like, is that Metallica playing? I'm like, yeah, it's Metallica. And it was just like completely like, you know, to that way of thinking, up until that point, it was like something you wouldn't think of me playing. Like, if you knew who I was at the age of 22, you wouldn't think of me as a Metallica fan. But things changed. My political views altered. You know, the very last vestiges of my hippie self were dead. I was now who I am now, more or less. Not completely, but along the same lines. If any of you have heard any of my political rantings on my SimCity episodes or during streams or anything like that, I went from... that is where that comes from. That is where that started. And I saw the world in a different way. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I didn't want to have long hair and a facial hair anymore. So In the weeks and months after that, I shaved this all off, and I got my hair cut shorter and shorter, eventually until it was something like this. And that was how I transformed. Like I said, everything was different. And I entered a phase of my life where I did not know what was what. I did not know what was up or down. And I made half-hearted attempts to look for a job in Williamsport, but mostly I just sat in my apartment and sulked. It was in that moment, though, that I got into Star Trek, like in a big way, which was kind of like random, but I watched all 10 Star Trek movies and every special feature over the course of a few days. And I just sort of basically sat there. Like, I went more than a week without a shower, more than once. You know, it got bitterly cold in Williamsport and in that December. So I just sat there. I didn't even know how to turn on the heater. I could never figure that out, and I was too embarrassed or lazy to call the landlord. So it was like in the 40s and 50s in my apartment. I didn't care. I put on some long underwear and then like a sweater over that and everything, and I was cozy. You know, I was fine. I just sat there and just marinated in my own sweat and body fluids for like a week. I just sort of just wasted away. And at the end of December, I completely ran out of money, and I wasn't even sure if I'd have the money to put gas in my car. So I basically begged my parents for a loan, which was kind of embarrassing because just 4 or 5 months before, I was all like, you know, I'm going to show you, I'm going to make it big, and things are going to be different. You know, I'm going to be big trucker guy, and you're all going to see. And now I was just like, I've fucked up. I've ruined everything. Can you spare me some money? And they're like, we're not going to do that. What we will do is lend you the money to move yourself back home and try to rebuild things here. And I had no choice but to accept. So, running out on my 1-year lease after only 5 months, on the 3rd of January, 2009, I packed all my stuff up and I came back here to this basement, and that was that. It was all over. And for the next 3 months, I would basically be in a coma, more or less. Like, I barely even looked for a job. Like, I would just sleep, and then I'd come downstairs, watch TV, watch YouTube videos. This is when I discovered Let's Playing, by the way. And I would just sit and vegetate. There was a time where I would get up later and later every day, to the point where I was getting up in the afternoon, and I was getting up in the evening, and then I was getting up at like 10 at night, 1 in the morning, to the point where I wrapped all the way around back to the front of the time. And I just sat and wasted away. It wasn't until April that the twin things that have, well, not the twin things, but the two things that have defined my life up until now came into effect. It was, well, for one thing, I started working at Wawa once again in April, and I having been a big avid viewer of Let's Plays and Sir Ron Lionheart and specifically, decided I wanted to make Let's Play videos too. And so on April 23rd, 2009, I created the Bone Canoe 86 channel, not thinking that anyone was going to care or pay attention to it, but I just felt like doing it because I really was into Let's Plays and I wanted to make one. So it was those twin things that began the phase of my life that has continued to this day, And but the thing is, none of that stuff ever reversed the change that happened in my mind, and it never really quelled my feelings of not knowing where I was in life or what I was doing. It merely put a patch over it. It merely gave me some structure over which to base my life around. And I can tell you truly that now I am no happier, nor am I more together with what I want in my life or how my life is going than I was in those months that I was just sitting in the basement vegetating. I am just as lost and confused and out of my head as I was back then. I've just gotten very good at distracting myself. And that's all I've been able to do. But those changes have seethed in my mind for so long that I've become this person now who, like, I don't know, well, you all know me. I'm how I am. I'm about as far away from this guy as you can get. I am who I am now. And now I'm 27. And I frankly can't believe that I'm 27. And, like, to me, this stuff just, like, happened yesterday. And because in a very meaningful way, I do feel like I've been in some sort of coma the last 4 years. Like, I feel like nothing happened in those 4 years. And here I am today. And ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of story time. Like I said, it was a long story. It took over an hour. But I was very glad to tell this because, let me tell you, like, I've wanted to tell this story to all of you for a very long time. And now I have. So I can get that off my chest. I can upload it to YouTube, and it can be seen. It can be a record.